The island of Sodor was flourishing. In addition to tourists, more and more people were making their homes in the developing communities. To meet demands, the Fact Controller decided to add more coaches to the express. The big engines were pleased. All except James. One morning, James arrived at the big station to collect the slow goods. He eyed the waiting express at the next platform. It seemed to stretch on for miles. A horn interrupted his thoughts as Boko rolled alongside. "Good morning, James. Come to wish me good luck, have you?"
"Looks like you'll need it," replied James. "Don't the extra coaches give you trouble?"
"I was worried they would, especially on the hill. Driver knows better, though. He gives me plenty of speed beforehand, and we coast along." James glanced at the coaches again. A feeling of dread washed over him. "Is everything all right?" inquired Boko.
"Oh, yes," James replied hastily. "Right as rain. Must be off. These trucks won't pull themselves, you know. Best of luck, Boko."
James hurried away. Boko was stunned. Something's not right, he thought. Something wasn't right. For as cocky as James could be, he wasn't blind to his own limits. On level ground, he could pull long trains with ease. The gradients, however, proved challenging, and he knew they would now be harder than ever. It soon came time for James's first run with the new express. He simmered silently at the platform, thinking of nothing but the hill. Before he knew it, a guard's whistle blew.
Come along, come along,"
he puffed determinedly to the coaches. "Give it your all, James," hooted Boko from a nearby siding. Out on the main line, the train picked up speed. James began to feel much better. But all too soon, Edward's station loomed in the distance.
"I can do it! I can do it!"
he puffed to himself. James tore through the station and began the ascent up Gorn's Hill. It didn't take long for him to feel the drag of the heavy coaches, and soon he slowed to a crawl.
"I must do it! I must do it!"
he strained. "Steady on, James," cautioned the driver. "We can call for a banker if we need."
"I'll get over this hill if it's the last thing I do,"
gritted James. "It just might be, with how he's carrying on," the fireman muttered grimly. Slowly but surely, James and the coaches crested the top of the hill. He was relieved, but exhausted, and struggled to get the train back up to speed. When he finally hissed into the last station, he was 10 minutes late, and the passengers were ornery. When he returned to the sheds, his driver spoke to him. "I think the express proved too much for us today," he sighed.
"Pah!"
snorted James.
"We made it over the hill, didn't we?"
"Only just," replied the driver sternly. "You'll damage yourself at this rate, and if the passengers keep complaining like they did today, we won't be heading it much longer."
"Ugh, I can pull it just as well as the others,"
James retorted defiantly.
"And I'll be on time tomorrow, mark my word."
The driver admitted defeat as James shut his eyes. Unknown to either of them, Boko had heard everything. The next day, James was coasting along the line again. The coaches hummed happily, but he paid no mind to them.
Won't be late, won't be late,
he grunted. Once again, Edward's station appeared and the signals showed line clear. Give it all you've got, old boy, encouraged the driver, and he opened the regulator. James gathered speed and charged at the hill, but his efforts were for naught. Once more, the coaches dragged him to a near standstill. His wheels spun, but he couldn't get a proper grip. Then, bang! James was enveloped in a cloud of steam. His driver and fireman staggered out of the cab, coughing hoarsely. That's torn it. We'll need help now. Help soon arrived, in the form of Boko. Are you alright? He asked, concerned. James didn't answer. He just looked sadly at his buffers. Boko hastily coupled up and pulled the train all the way to the last station. Despite his best efforts to make up time, the express still arrived late. The passengers were furious and complained bitterly to the station master. I've got places to be, grumbled one man. I thought this was an express. That scrawny engine isn't getting us anywhere fast, added a woman. If that clapped-out thing can't get us here on time, finished an elderly man, pointing at James, I shan't ride on this railway any longer. The waiting mainland diesel snickered, but a glare from Boko silenced him, and he scuttled away once the passengers were on board. Ignore them, Boko smiled. I know you did your best today.
Yes, sighed James, but it seems my best wasn't good enough.
The passenger's words echoed in his smoke box. For the first time, James truly felt clapped out. James wasn't the same when he returned from the works. He trudged along with the slow trains, hardly saying anything to anyone. When the day was done, he'd retire to the shed and fall asleep without a word. I knew the express was important to him, Boko remarked to Edward, but not to this extent. Even the prospect of pulling Dowager Hat's special excursion didn't shake him from his stupor. Edward was worried. So he spoke to the Fat Controller. A few days later, James found himself working at Edward's station. He shunted in the yard and took Boko's branch line trains while the diesel pulled the express. Unfortunately, it didn't have the effect Edward had hoped for.
Disgraceful, James grunted. Imagine pulling the express one week and being confined to a branch line the next.
Come now, James, smiled Edward. I'm certainly glad you're here. And besides, it's a nice change of pace.
I'll fall from grace if you ask me,
grumbled James, and he bumped some trucks hard. Now, for all of his kindness, Edward had a tendency to be impatient. This was especially true when it came to his own trains. He hated being late. He wasn't as fast as the other engines and didn't like having to make up for lost time. Though he tried to be understanding, Edward's patience was wearing thin. James refused to bank trains up Gorn's Hill and was sluggish with shunting. Time and time again, Edward was left picking up the slack. "Just what time do you call this?" fussed Daisy as Edward bustled into the junction. "I'm sorry," panted Edward. As I'm now late, I've got no time for excuses," glared Daisy. "But I suggest you not make this a habit, my dear. The fat controller won't like it." He didn't, and after more delayed trains, he told Edward as such. Not wanting to make James feel worse, he took the blame himself. "I'm sorry, sir," Edward sighed. "It won't happen again." When Edward returned and found his yard in disarray, he had a sinking feeling it would happen again. He frowned when he saw James skulking about. "We do have a timetable, you know."
"Pah," said James. "It's just a branch line, not like there's an express to keep to time."
"That's quite enough," interrupted Edward. "There's more to life than the express. You're not even trying to keep things in order. I expect my trains on my branch line to be timely. If you can't do that, just go back to sulking in the shed." Before James could reply, Henry arrived with the express and whistled for a banker. "Don't worry," said Edward sharply. "I'll get it." Come on, he huffed, hastily pushing the train up the hill. Settle down, grumbled Henry. Not so fast, groaned the coaches. At last, Henry was over the hill, and Edward hurried back to the station. Meanwhile, the trucks had noticed the look of guilt on James's face. "It's been quite lovely knowing you all," said one, "but I'll be bound for the scrapyard if this horrid thing keeps pushing me about." "Takes a lot to upset Edward," commented a second. "Couldn't go as an express engine," laughed another, "and he's not much of a shunter either."
"That's enough!"
snapped James. With a hard bump, the trucks rolled out of the siding and onto the main line. At that moment, Edward appeared. He didn't see the signal or the trucks fouling the line. "Oh dear," he winced. "Oh dear," echoed James, who was feeling rather guilty. Soon, Donald arrived with the breakdown train. And the fat controller. "I am disappointed, James," he scolded. "Edward asked me to send you here to take your mind off your mishap. This is not a kind way to thank him. I expect you'll pull your weight while Edward is inspected. Is that clear?" James was ashamed, and the message was crystal clear. Thankfully, Edward wasn't hurt, and he and the trucks were soon back on the rails.
"I'm sorry, Edward,"
he said in the shed that night.
"I've been nothing but a nuisance since I arrived."
"Well," replied Edward, "that accident could have been avoided had I not been so hasty. I'm sorry for being short. I know these changes have been hard for you."
"Well,"
added James sadly,
"if I can't handle simple shunting or branch line trains, maybe I don't deserve the express."
"Tomorrow seems like a perfect chance for a fresh start," smiled Edward. "There is a passenger train to take, and my coaches would be thrilled to be pulled by a mainline engine." For the first time in days, James smiled. A fresh start was just what he needed. While James worked on Edward's line, he often saw Trevor the traction engine. Each time he passed the orchard, he whistled gaily.
Trevor smiled, but never whistled back, as he didn't seem to be in steam. This gave James cause for concern. One morning, he stopped close to the orchard to collect apples. "Another busy day for you, Trevor?" "Much wishful thinking on your part," Trevor chuckled dryly. "I'd certainly prefer to be busy." Trevor gave a heavy sigh. I do envy you, James." "Me? An engine who can't even pull an express properly anymore?" asked James, bewildered. "Pah!" snored Trevor. "Who needs an express? You can go anywhere and do anything. I used to go to farms, quarries, towns. Seems I'm only needed here nowadays. It's a shame. I do like to explore. Why, I'll bet you've seen the whole island by now." "Actually," James faltered, "I haven't. Mainline work only takes you from one end to the other. I've not been on some branch lines for years, if ever." "Why not?" asked Trevor. "Some engines," James replied, pointedly, "think less of branch lines. I suppose that rubbed off on me." "Ah," said Trevor, "perhaps the disdain is born of jealousy. Those heavier engines never get to travel these rails, but you do." Just then, thunder echoed in the distance. "Well, this weather, the only travelling I'll be doing is to my shed," chuckled James as he puffed off. "You stay put too, Trevor." That night, the wind howled and the rain beat down on the shed roof. James's sleep was uneasy, but not because of the storm. He was thinking about Trevor. By morning, the storm had passed. James and Edward were being readied for their first trains when they saw the station master pacing the yard. "For pity's sake, where's a crane when you need one?" "Is something wrong, sir?" asked Edward. "Afraid so. That wind last night brought down trees along the drain. Bill and Ben are trapped at the clay pits. We need to clear the line, but the breakdown cranes are all in use." "We don't need a crane, sir," beamed James. "We need Trevor. I can fetch him if Edward takes my passengers." The necessary arrangements were made, and soon James and Trevor were steaming down the branch line. James had never been past the harbour before, and was amazed when he saw the drain. Downed trees blocked the way, and rainwater pooled around the line. "A little water won't stop me," laughed Trevor, and he set to work removing the trees. When the line was clear and deemed safe, James carried on to the clay pits, while Trevor saw the trees. He helped Bill and Ben take their china clay to the harbour. "I say, Ben," smirked Bill, "red is a nice change from all these blue engines we see. But I still think our colour is better though," grinned Ben. At last, the work was done. James set off with a train of china clay, timber, and a traction engine. "Well, Trevor," he asked when they reached the orchard, "how'd you fancy exploring today?" "Oh, it's just what I need," said Trevor, yawning happily. And I hope it's what you needed too." With that, Trevor felt contentedly to sleep, while James continued to the junction. "Yes, Trevor," he smiled. "Exactly." One day, James took a goods train to the other railway. He was thrilled to be back on Main Line, and thanks to Edward's influence, he kept the trucks in order. They hardly muttered a word the whole journey. He arrived on time and was looking forward to a rest before going home. But his fireman was worried. "You'll need more coal," he grumbled. "Well, there's not a bunker in sight. We'll have to ask around. There must be coal somewhere," added the driver. "I doubt we'll get much assistance," muttered James. As he moved through the yard, Diesels eyed him menacingly. James wasn't frightened, but he knew he'd have to swallow his pride and ask for help. Excuse me?" he called to a big blue diesel. "Where might I find some coal?" The diesel glanced at him. "Soda engine?" he asked unenthusiastically. Yeah," replied James. "My name is Claptrap." The diesel suddenly chortled. "I beg your pardon?" "Oh yes, I know you," cackled the diesel. "Claptrap, the pitiful thing that broke down with the express. Oh, and look, they even gave you a little goods train to make you feel useful. How touching." James was speechless. "Run along back to your island of delusion. No, I feel the scrapyard would be more fitting." "That's enough out of ya." A shunter scuttled over. "Your coaches are waiting. Get fueled and be off with ya." The big diesel harumphed. "At least a modern engine will be pulling the express. I'll go and show your controller what he's missing." As he roared off, the shunter spoke. "Ignore him. A bother to all of us. No bunkers or chutes here. We've no use for them, you see. Well, there's coal trucks at the back of the yard that you're welcome to." James whistled, "Thank you," and set off, brooding over the other diesel's words. The big diesel was waiting for his driver to return. He was still thinking about James, and that's when he noticed the coal trucks. "Let's see old Claptrap get home now," he chuckled. When his driver returned, the diesel told him they were to bring the trucks to the station. The driver, unsuspecting, backed them down the siding. The diesel tried to slow down to couple to the trucks, but couldn't. "I say, what's this?" he yelped. The driver tried and tried, but his brakes wouldn't work. Suddenly, crash! At that moment, James appeared. As the dust settled, he couldn't help but laugh. The trucks, squashed against the buffers, were now in pieces. The diesel sat crooked, with lumps of coal piled around him. "Well, well," remarked James. "What have you got yourself into, Lumpy?" That's not my name," the diesel spluttered angrily. "It is now," grunted the shunter, who'd been alerted by the commotion. "Serves you right for being hard." Lumpy huffed and looked sulkily away. "Couldn't have picked a better time for your tantrum, eh?" scolded the shunter. "Your express to soda is due soon, and here you are, dirty and derailed." "I'll take it," James offered. "You?" scoffed Lumpy. "Huh, I'd like to see you try." "I will try," James snapped back, "which is more than I can say for you." Soon, everything was arranged. After James's tender was filled, he hurriedly backed onto the coaches. When the whistle blew, he was off. Come on, he puffed eagerly. "We're coming, don't fuss, we're coming, don't fuss," answered the coaches. The train was soon coasting along the line. Admittedly, the coal was of poor quality. Black smoke poured from James's funnel. The coaches were heavy too, and he was beginning to feel puffed. Won't give up, he snorted. Presently, it grew harder for James to breathe. The fireman was concerned. "Blasting coal's barely burning. We might be in trouble." Won't be beat. James coughed determinedly. He summoned all the steam and strength he had. At long last, the big station appeared in the distance. With one final effort, James pulled into the platform with a triumphant whistle. "I've done it! I've done it!" he cried. "You certainly have." Walking towards him was the Fat Controller. "I heard about all your ordeal on the other railway. I'm very proud of you, James. Would you like to pull the express again? I know the extra coaches complicate matters, but..." No thank you, sir," James cut in. "I don't need the express." The Fat Controller was stunned. "I'm a mixed traffic engine. Coaches or trucks, what does it matter? I'll pull them all with these. Go anywhere, do anything, that's me." The Fat Controller chuckled, glad that James was back to his old self. James is a much happier engine now. Sometimes he misses the thrill of the express. Venturing to new parts of the island makes up for it. Besides, the passengers on the local trains always remark how smooth and smart he is. James couldn't complain about that. And what about Lumpy? Well, you could say he's a different engine too. Much quieter and far less brash. His story had spread, and he dreaded going to Sodor. "I thought you were modern," remarked Gorn slyly. "Fancy using coal, do you? How aggressive!" Lumpy grunted as he backed onto his train. "Oh look," James smirked. "They've given you a little goods train so you can feel useful. How touching!" The engines howled with laughter. Lumpy, feeling far from touched, rolled away. He never referred to James as Claptrap again.